The shift in the room was immediate, tangible, almost physical. Most defendants enter my courtroom carrying a visible weight, the weight of anxiety, the weight of uncertainty, the weight of knowing that for the next few minutes, their fate rests in someone else's hands. But when the doors swung open for him, there was no weight. There was only an air of inconvenience. A young man, barely 22, walked down the center aisle, not like a defendant facing charges, but like a CEO arriving late to a meeting he didn't want to attend. The silence that followed him wasn't respectful, it was stunned. He wore a suit that likely cost more than the annual salary of the bailiff standing to my right. But it wasn't the clothes that drew the eye, it was the posture. He moved with a practiced lethargy, a deliberate slowness that screamed to everyone present, I do not have to rush for you. You wait for me. I have seen fear in this room. I have seen regret. I have seen anger. But what I saw in his eyes as he took his place at the defense table was something far more dangerous than any of those. It was boredom, the boredom of someone who believes that consequences are things that happen to other people, people with different last names, people with smaller bank accounts. He didn't look at the flag. He didn't look at the clerk. He didn't even look at me. He looked at his watch, then pulled out his phone, sliding it under the table with a smirk that suggested the rules of this building were merely suggestions for someone of his status. Across from him stood Officer Miller. I've known Officer Miller for years. He is a man of discipline, a veteran who treats every citizen with the same stoic professionalism. Today, he stood rigid, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed forward, but I could see the tension in his jaw. It wasn't fear, it was the supreme effort of holding back, because standing 5 feet away from him was a young man who had not only endangered lives on the highway, but had turned the arrest itself into a spectacle, a joke for his social media followers. I watched the defendant, let's call him by his action, not his name, lean over to his high-priced attorney and whisper something. They both chuckled, a soft, dismissive sound that cut through the solemnity of the court like a knife. That sound is the sound of privilege. It assumes that the ending of the story has already been written, that the check has already been signed, and that this hearing is just a formality before the celebration dinner. That assumption is a poison in the justice system. I sat back in my chair, allowing the moment to stretch. I didn't bang the gavel. I didn't demand order. Sometimes you have to let arrogance fill the room completely so that everyone can see exactly what it looks like before you dismantle it. I watched him check his fingernails. I watched him cast a sideways glance at Officer Miller, a look of pure, unadulterated condescension. And in that moment, before a single legal argument was made, I knew this case would not be about a speeding ticket or a reckless driving charge. It was going to be about a collision, not between cars, but between two worlds, the world where money fixes everything and the world where the law applies to everyone. Before we proceed any further into what happened next, I want to ask you something directly. If you believe that a courtroom is the one place in America where a billionaire's son should stand no taller than a janitor's son, I ask you to like this video right now, subscribe for more stories where justice is blind to bank accounts, and comment the word equal below, because if we lose that equality here, we lose it everywhere. The prosecutor began to read the charges: high-speed reckless driving, 110 miles per hour in a 45 zone, evading an officer, and then the new charge that had been added just this morning, disorderly conduct during the arrest. As the list went on, painting a picture of a potential tragedy narrowly avoided, the defendant let out a sigh, a loud, theatrical sigh of exhaustion. He wasn't listening to the charges. He was performing. He was signaling to the room that this was beneath him. I saw Officer Miller's knuckles turn white. I saw the people in the gallery, ordinary citizens waiting for their turn, shift in their seats, looking from him to me, wondering the same thing they always wonder when wealth walks through those doors. Is he going to get away with it? That is the question that haunts every courtroom. And as I looked at him, leaning back in his chair, tapping a rhythm on the table while his crimes were read aloud, I knew that my job today wasn't just to issue a sentence. It was to answer that question. The prosecutor didn't argue. He didn't make a grand opening statement. He simply asked for permission to play the body cam footage. In cases like this, words are often insufficient. You can describe arrogance, you can describe recklessness, but seeing it, hearing the tone of voice, watching the dismissal in real time, strips away any defense a lawyer might try to construct. I granted permission. The large monitors on the walls flickered to life. The room dimmed slightly, focusing every pair of eyes on the grainy, high-definition reality of 3 nights ago. The video began with the sound of wind and a siren wailing against the roar of a high-performance engine. It wasn't just speeding, it was a weaponized use of a vehicle. We watched the car weave through traffic, forcing a minivan onto the shoulder, cutting across 3 lanes without a signal. It was the driving of someone who believed the road belonged to him and everyone else was merely an obstacle. When the car finally pulled over, it didn't stop immediately. It coasted, taking its time, prolonging the officer's pursuit. Officer Miller approached the window cautiously. We all watched on the screen. The window didn't roll down. It cracked open barely an inch. "License and registration, please." Miller's voice was calm, professional. From inside the car, the response was not compliance. It was a laugh. A sharp, incredulous laugh. "Do you have any idea how much this meeting is costing me right now?" The voice was clear, dripping with condescension. "I'm on a call. Step away." In the courtroom, a gasp rippled through the gallery. The audacity was suffocating, but I wasn't looking at the screen anymore. I was looking at the defendant sitting in front of me. Most people, when confronted with video evidence of their worst behavior, shrink. They look down. They feel the weight of shame. He did not shrink. He was watching the screen with a faint smile, as if he were watching a highlight reel of a game he had won. He leaned over to his attorney again, pointing at the screen when his digital self dismissed the officer, seemingly impressed by his own performance. He wasn't embarrassed by his disrespect. He was proud of it. On the screen, the escalation continued. Officer Miller repeated the order. "Sir, roll down the window and step out of the vehicle." "Call the chief," the young man on the video snapped, holding his phone up to the glass. I said, "Call the chief. Tell him who you stopped. I want your badge number and I want you to apologize for wasting my time." He wasn't just refusing a lawful order. He was trying to exert a hierarchy that does not exist on the side of a highway. He was trying to use his father's name as a shield and a sword. He mocked Officer Miller's uniform, making a comment about his salary that was so crude, so needlessly cruel, that the court reporter flinched while transcribing it. "You're a public servant," the voice on the video sneered. "That means you serve me. Now fetch your supervisor before I have your job." The video ended with Officer Miller finally managing to extract him from the vehicle. While he screamed threats of lawsuits and unemployment, the screen went black, leaving the courtroom in a heavy, stunned silence. The echo of his entitlement still hung in the air. I turned my chair slowly to face him. The smile was still lingering on his lips. He adjusted his cuff, looking bored again, as if the video we had just watched was merely an administrative error that his lawyer would clear up with a phone call. He had no concept of the gravity of what had just been shown. He believed that the video proved his point, that he had been inconvenienced by a subordinate. That is the danger of unchecked privilege. It blinds you to your own humanity. It convinces you that the laws of physics and the laws of society are negotiable. And as I looked at him, I realized that a standard sentence, a fine, a suspended license, would mean absolutely nothing to him. A fine is just a fee for doing business when you have unlimited resources. To reach someone who believes they are above the system has to do something they never expect. It has to stop negotiating. The video screen faded to black, but the echo of that arrogant laughter still hung in the air. Now it was the defense's turn. His attorney, Mr. Sterling, a man whose reputation was built on keeping consequences away from the wealthy, buttoned his jacket and stood up. He didn't look at the screen. He knew the video was damning. Instead, he looked at me with a smile that was meant to be conspiratorial, as if we were both men of the world who understood how these things truly worked. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth, practiced, the kind of voice that charges by the minute. "We've seen the video. And yes, my client was spirited. He was under immense pressure. He is currently managing a merger for his father's company valued at $300 million. The stress is unimaginable for a young man of 22. Spirited. That was the word he chose. Not dangerous, not abusive. Spirited. It was a linguistic sanitization designed to turn a crime into a personality quirk. He was trying to frame the defendant not as a perpetrator, but as a victim of his own success. He continued, walking closer to the bench, trying to shrink the distance between us, trying to make this a private conversation between peers rather than a public hearing. This is a young man with an exemplary future, Your Honor. He attends a prestigious university. He chairs a charity foundation. A criminal record, even a misdemeanor, would be a stain that could ruin a very bright career over one moment of frustration. Then came the pivot, the moment they always try to turn the courtroom into a marketplace. We are prepared to pay the maximum fine immediately. In fact, he paused for effect, glancing at the gallery. My client would like to donate $10,000 to the Police Benevolent Fund as a gesture of goodwill. He wants to show he supports law enforcement. A bribe wrapped in a ribbon of charity. I watched the defendant nod in agreement. He pulled out a checkbook from his jacket pocket, placing it on the table with a heavy, deliberate thud, audible in the quiet room. He held a gold pen in his hand, poised and ready. He wasn't offering remorse. He was offering a transaction. He genuinely believed that the moral injury he had caused could be invoiced and paid for like a room service bill. Officer Miller, the lawyer, gestured vaguely behind him without actually looking at the officer, perhaps took the interaction too personally. My client is used to a certain level of efficiency. He was late. He was stressed. This wasn't malice, Your Honor. It was a misunderstanding of protocols. I looked at Officer Miller. He hadn't moved. His face remained stone, but his eyes were burning. To be told that being abused, threatened, and endangered on the side of a highway was just a misunderstanding of protocols is the final insult. The defense was building a wall of affluence. They weren't arguing innocence. They were arguing exception. They were arguing that because this young man had money, his time was more valuable than the safety of the families on that road. They were arguing that because he had a bright future, he shouldn't be held accountable for his present. We ask for a dismissal of the disorderly conduct charge and a fine for the speeding, Mr. Sterling concluded, leaning comfortably on the podium. Let's not ruin a young man's life over a bad afternoon. He sat down, confident. The defendant smirked at me, pen still poised over the checkbook, waiting for the number. He thought it was over. He thought the deal was closed. But in my courtroom, you cannot buy your way out of character. Silence is a judge's loudest weapon. I let the silence stretch after Mr. Sterling sat down. I looked at the checkbook sitting on the defense table. I looked at the gold pen still resting in the defendant's hand. Then I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. Mr. Sterling, I said softly, my voice carrying to the back of the room without needing a microphone. You can put your checkbook away. The court is not a vending machine, and justice is not for sale today. The defendant blinked. He looked at his lawyer, confused. This wasn't in the script. He slowly capped the pen, the first sign of hesitation I had seen since he walked in. Stand up, I ordered, not asked, ordered. He stood, but he did it slowly, buttoning his jacket with a sigh of annoyance. He still thought this was a negotiation. Your attorney says you were spirited because of stress, I began, locking eyes with him. He says you are managing a $300 million merger. Is that correct? It is, the young man replied, his voice bored. It's a very complex deal. A lot of people's livelihoods depend on me. I see, I nodded, feigning understanding. And because people depend on you, you decided that the laws of physics do not apply to your vehicle. You decided that driving 110 miles per hour in a 45 zone, a residential zone where children wait for school buses, was a necessary business expense. I was in control, he scoffed, rolling his eyes. It's a performance car. It handles that speed easily. I wasn't going to hit anyone. You think you were in control? I corrected him, my voice sharpening. In the video, you asked Officer Miller a specific question. You asked him, do you have any idea how much this meeting is costing me? He was taking forever, the defendant interrupted. Time is money, Judge, literally. Let's talk about value then, I said, leaning closer to the microphone. Since you are a businessman, let's appraise the situation. You offered $10,000 to the police fund. You think that covers the cost of your disrespect. But I have a question for you. I paused, waiting until he was forced to look at me. How much is Officer Miller's life worth? The defendant froze. Excuse me? You heard me, I continued, my tempo increasing. You passed a minivan on the shoulder doing triple digits. If a tire had blown, if a child had stepped out, if Officer Miller had stepped into traffic to stop you. What is the market value of the human lives you endangered? Is it included in your $300 million merger? Can you write a check to bring a dead officer back to his family? I didn't kill anyone, he snapped, his face flushing red. This is hypothetical. You're being dramatic. I am being preventative, I shot back. You look at that officer and you see a servant. You look at this court and you see a transaction. You believe that your bank account grants you immunity from the social contract that binds the rest of us. I picked up the file on my desk, holding it up. You have 3 prior speeding tickets, all paid instantly, all dismissed or reduced to non-moving violations. You have learned that money buys silence. You have learned that the law is just a toll booth for people like you. I have a clean record, he argued, his arrogance cracking into defensiveness. No, I said, dropping the file. You have a bought record. But today, the currency has changed. You came here prepared to pay a fee. You came here prepared to buy your way out of inconvenience. But you made a mistake. You threatened an officer of the law. You tried to use your status to intimidate a public servant. And then you stood in my courtroom and laughed about it. I saw his lawyer try to interject, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Your Honor, my client is simply... Sit down, Mr. Sterling. I cut him off without looking away from the defendant. Young man, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, you mocked Officer Miller's salary. You asked him if he knew who your father was. Well, I don't care who your father is. In this room, you are not a CEO. You are not a billionaire's son. You are a defendant who has demonstrated a complete lack of regard for human life. The smirk was gone now. For the first time, his hands were trembling slightly at his sides. He looked at the exit, then back at me. He realized finally that he couldn't leave. You wanted to know the cost of your actions, I asked. You are about to find out, and I promise you, it is a price you cannot pay with a check. I watched the realization hit him. It wasn't a sudden crash, it was a slow, creeping frost. For the first time in his life, the invisible armor of his father's wealth had evaporated. He stood there, naked in the eyes of the law, just a young man who had made a series of terrible choices and was now standing on the precipice of consequence. The checkbook lay on the table, a useless artifact of a world that no longer existed inside these walls. In this court, I began, my voice steady, stripped of all anger, leaving only the cold, hard weight of authority. We do not punish based on net worth. We punish based on actions. We punish based on the danger posed to the community. And most importantly, we punish to dismantle the belief that some citizens are more equal than others. I picked up my pen, hovering over the judgment sheet. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the ventilation system. Mr. Sterling, the defense attorney, opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer another plea, another deal, but I silenced him with a single raised hand. The time for negotiation had passed when his client decided to laugh at a police officer. You treated the highway like a playground, I continued. You treated Officer Miller like a servant, and you treated this court like a marketplace. That ends now. I am finding you guilty on all counts: reckless driving, evading an officer, and disorderly conduct. The defendant swallowed hard. He was expecting a lecture, maybe a community service order he could pay someone else to do. He was not expecting what came next. For the charge of disorderly conduct and intimidation of a law enforcement officer, I declared, looking him straight in the eye, I am sentencing you to the maximum penalty allowed by law, 30 days in the county jail, effective immediately. The gasp from the gallery was audible. The defendant's eyes went wide. Jail? He stammered, his voice cracking. For shouting? No, I corrected him. For attempting to corrupt the execution of justice, for believing you could bully a badge, For the charge of reckless driving and endangerment, I went on, relentless, I am sentencing you to an additional 60 days to be served consecutively. That is 90 days total. No early release, no weekend furlough. You will sit in a cell and you will have 90 days to think about the value of the lives you put at risk. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling shot up, his composure shattered. This is unprecedented. My client has no prior convictions. This is excessive. It is necessary, I shot back. But I am not finished. I turned back to the defendant, whose face had gone pale, the color draining away like water down a drain. He looked at his lawyer, desperate for the magic trick that always saved him, but the lawyer was helpless. Furthermore, I stated, I am revoking your driver's license for a period of 5 years. You have proven that you lack the maturity and the responsibility required to operate a motor vehicle. You used a car as a weapon of intimidation. You will not sit behind a wheel in this state until you have proven you understand the gravity of that privilege. And finally, I added, looking at the checkbook one last time, the fine. You offered $10,000. The court accepts a fine of $2,000, the statutory maximum. But you will not pay it. You will work it off. Upon your release, you will complete 200 hours of community service, not chairing a gala, not signing papers at your father's foundation. You will be picking up trash on the side of the very highway you used as a racetrack. The defendant slumped back, his legs giving out. He gripped the table for support. The reality was crashing down on him. 90 days, no license, trash duty. The future his lawyer had threatened me with was on hold. Officer, I nodded to the bailiff, take him into custody. As the handcuffs clicked, a sound far sharper and more final than the scratch of a pen on a check, the young man looked at me one last time. There was no boredom in his eyes now. There was no arrogance. There was only the terrified look of a child who had finally been told no. This court is adjourned, I said, and the gavel came down. It wasn't just a sound. It was the closing of a door on a life of entitlement and the opening of a door to reality. The sound of the side door closing behind the bailiff and the defendant was heavy, final. It cut through the room like a period at the end of a very long, very loud sentence. The young man who had walked in with a strut, checking his watch and rolling his eyes, was gone. In his place was an empty chair and a silence that felt entirely different from the one that had greeted him. It wasn't the silence of intimidation anymore. It was the silence of a spell being broken. I looked down at the defense table. Mr. Sterling was packing his briefcase. His movements were slow, almost mechanical. For the first time in a long time, his formula had failed. He looked at the checkbook still sitting on the table, the prop he had relied on to solve every problem his client had ever created. He picked it up, hesitated for a moment, and then slipped it into his pocket. He knew, and everyone watching knew, that the currency in this room had just changed. Influence had been devalued. Accountability was the only coin that mattered now. Then I looked at Officer Miller. Throughout the entire hearing, he had stood rigid, bracing himself for the usual outcome. A slap on the wrist, a smirk from the defendant, and the knowledge that he would have to go back out on patrol, knowing that the law didn't protect him the way it protected the rich. But now, his shoulders had dropped an inch. The tension in his jaw had released. He looked at me, and for a brief second, our eyes met. He didn't smile. Officers like Miller rarely do in court, but he nodded. A small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of restoration. He wasn't just an officer who had won a case. He was a human being whose dignity had been returned to him. The court had validated that his life, his badge, and his safety mattered more than a CEO's schedule. The gallery, too, had shifted. The cynicism that usually hangs over cases involving the wealthy, the collective breath held in anticipation of injustice, had exhaled. I saw people whispering, not in outrage, but in disbelief. They had just witnessed a unicorn. A billionaire's son facing the same consequences as a plumber's son. Mr. Sterling, I said, breaking the quiet, you may retrieve your client's personal effects from the bailiff, his phone, his watch, and his keys. He won't be needing them where he is going. Understood, Your Honor, Sterling replied, his voice devoid of its earlier charm. He walked out, a man who had brought a wallet to a gunfight. I sat back in my chair, listening to the hum of the room returning to normal. It's a heavy thing, sending a young man to jail. It is not something I take pleasure in. I don't enjoy seeing potential wasted behind bars, but I also know that potential without discipline is just chaos waiting to happen. That young man had spent 22 years being taught that he was the center of the universe. Today, for the first time, he learned he was just part of a society. The 90 days he would spend in county jail would be uncomfortable. They would be frightening, but they would also be the most honest days of his life. For the first time, no one would care who his father was. No one would care about the merger. They would only care about how he conducted himself in that 8 by 10 cell. I looked at the docket for the next case, another speeding ticket, another person waiting for judgment. The machine of justice keeps turning, but the air in the room remained charged. We had drawn a line in the sand today. We had proven that the law is not a spider web that catches the small flies and lets the hornets break through. Today, the web held. As I prepared to call the next case, I thought about the message that would leave this courtroom. It wasn't just about one spoiled child. It was a signal to every person in this city who believes their status is a shield. It was a reminder that in courtroom 3A, the gavel falls with the same weight for everyone. And sometimes that sound is the only thing standing between civilization and entitlement. When a case like this concludes, people often call it a tragedy for the defendant. They see a young man with a bright future now sitting in a cell, wearing a jumpsuit instead of a tailored suit. They talk about ruined potential, but I view it differently. This wasn't a tragedy. It was an intervention. The real tragedy would have been letting him walk out of those doors with a lighter wallet and an untouched ego. That would have confirmed everything he believed about the world, that rules are for the poor and freedom is a commodity you purchase. By sending him to jail, I didn't ruin his life. I may have very well saved it. And more importantly, I may have saved the life of the person he would have eventually killed on that highway. I often think about the parents in situations like this. They were not in the courtroom today, but their presence was felt in every arrogant gesture, every smirk, every attempt to buy silence. You do not wake up one day at 22 believing you own the police. That is a lesson that is taught day by day, year by year. It is taught every time a mistake is covered up with cash. It is taught every time a consequence is intercepted by influence. We have a generation of children, wealthy and poor alike, who are suffering from a deficit of accountability. But for the wealthy, that deficit is dangerous. It turns them into missiles without guidance systems. They move through the world breaking things, objects, laws, people, never looking back because they have always had someone following behind them with a broom and a checkbook. Today, the broom was left in the closet. Today, the mess belonged to him. This case forces us to ask a difficult question about our society. What is the true definition of privilege? Is it the ability to do whatever you want, or is it the responsibility to do what is right because you have the means to do so? This young man had the best education money could buy, yet he lacked the most basic kindergarten lesson, respect for others. He had access to the best cars, yet he lacked the discipline to drive them safely. Wealth can buy a defense team, it can buy a suit, it can even buy a public image, but it cannot buy character. Character is built in the moments when no one is watching, and it is tested in the moments when everyone is watching. Today, under the glare of the courtroom lights, his character crumbled. I want you to understand that my ruling wasn't about anger. It wasn't about sticking it to the rich. It was about protection. The law is the only thing that stands between the strong and the weak. If I allow a billionaire's son to threaten a police officer without consequence, what message does that send to the single mother who gets a ticket for a broken taillight? It tells her that the game is rigged. It tells her that justice is a lie, and I will not allow my courtroom to become a liar. Compassion without accountability is not compassion. It is enabling. By giving him 90 days, I gave him the one thing his money could never buy, a reality check. I gave him a chance to dismantle the ego that was destroying him and rebuild something real. Whether he takes that chance is up to him, but at least now he knows the cost of refusing it. As the day wound down, I looked at the empty defense table one last time. The ghost of his entitlement was gone, replaced by the stark, clean air of justice served. It was a reminder that no matter how high you fly, the ground is always there, waiting to catch you if you fall. After the courtroom cleared, the silence that remained was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of intimidation that had greeted us at the start. It was the clean, quiet hum of a system working exactly as it was designed to. Officer Miller left the building not as a victim of abuse, but as a professional whose authority had been validated. The citizens in the gallery left not with cynicism, but with a renewed sense that perhaps, just perhaps, the rules still apply to everyone. News of the sentencing traveled fast. It always does when the unexpected happens. People are so used to seeing wealth act as a get-out-of-jail-free card that when they see it fail, it feels less like a legal ruling and more like a magic trick. But it shouldn't be magic. It should be the standard. I stayed on the bench for a few moments after the session ended. I thought about the defendant sitting in the holding cell downstairs, stripped of his phone, his watch, and his name brand suit. For the next 90 days, he will just be a number. It will be the hardest experience of his life, but I sleep well tonight knowing it is exactly what he needs. Courts are fragile places. They do not collapse all at once with a loud crash. They erode. They erode every time a judge looks at a bank account instead of a crime. They erode every time a lawyer successfully negotiates a lighter sentence because their client has a bright future. If we allow that erosion to continue, we don't just lose cases, we lose the very foundation of our democracy. Democracy does not live in speeches or in flags. It lives in moments like this. It lives in the decision to say no to power. It lives in the resolve to treat a billionaire's son exactly the same as a mechanic's son. That equality is the only thing that keeps our society from becoming a feudal system where the strong do what they want and the weak suffer what they must. This case was never just about speeding. It was about the social contract. It was about the promise that on the highway and in the courtroom, we are all equal. That young man tried to break that contract. He tried to rewrite the rules to suit his ego. And today, the law wrote back. As we close this file, I want you to remember one thing. Justice is not a passive noun. It is an active verb. It requires vigilance. It requires courage. And it requires the absolute refusal to be impressed by money. I hope that 90 days from now, that young man walks out of jail a different person. I hope he learns that respect is earned, not bought. But even if he doesn't, the community is safer because we drew a line. This is the end of this story. But the fight for equal justice continues every single day. If you believe that no one is above the law, if you believe that money should never buy immunity, then I have one final request for you. Like this video to support the message. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue to shine a light on these stories. And most importantly, go to the comments right now and write the word justice. Let them know that the world is watching. Let them know that we demand a system that works for everyone. Because justice only survives when people insist it belongs to them too. I am Judge Boyd. This court is adjourned.
The shift in the courtroom was instant and undeniable. Most defendants walk in carrying fear or regret, but this young man entered like the law was an inconvenience at just 22. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never been told no expensive suit, casual posture board expression. Not once did he look at the flag, the officer, or the bench. He checked his watch, smirked, and treated the courtroom like a delay. He could buy his way out of. Across from him stood Officer Miller, disciplined and silent, holding back justified anger. When the charges were read, the defendant's side laughed, even mocked the arrest. Body cam footage exposed it all: reckless speed, open contempt, and threats backed by privilege. And still he smiled, but arrogance collapses when money stops working. In that moment, this case stopped being about traffic violations. It became a collision between entitlement and accountability. And in this courtroom, only one of them was about to survive.